The Yemen civil war remains one of the most destructive conflicts in modern history, began in 2014, when the Houthi rebels, a Shia Muslim group from northern Yemen, grabbed the Yemen capital Sana'a, forcing President Mansour Hadi and his government into exile. What started as an internal conflict soon escalated into a regional war. On the other side, the Houthis, backed by Iran, claimed to fight against corruption and foreign influence. On the other, the Yemeni government, supported by Saudi Arabia and a coalition of Arab states, struggled to regain control. As the war intensified, global powers like USA also became involved. In this documentary, we analyze the Yemen war through international law and key principles of international law like pacta sunt servanda, non-intervention, state responsibility, sovereignty, immunity and many more. Today, after nearly a decade of war, Yemen faces one of the world's worst humanitarian disasters with many deaths and millions of displaced civilians. In addition, we explore this war with relevant authorities and examples. The traditional view of international law was centered on state sovereignty. However, modern developments have transformed this perspective, protecting fundamental human values and ensuring justice, even if it challenges state sovereignty. How much impact has this situation had on the Yemen war? Join us as we uncover the untold realities of the Yemen war and its significance in the evolving landscape of international law.
The Yemen war reflects how state sovereignty has been repeatedly violated by external powers, transforming the country into a battlefield for competing regional and global interests.
Yemen's sovereignty has been undermined by the Saudi-led coalition's military intervention, Iran's backing of the Houthis, and the United States' role in arms trading and indirect involvement. These actions have tainted Yemen's political independence and territorial integrity, leaving its people unable to determine their governance freely. Even Saudi Arabia, while claiming self-defense under Article 51 of the UN Charter, faces sovereignty challenges through Houthi cross-border attacks and Iran's influence near its borders. The interplay of external forces has turned the conflict into a proxy war, eroding the very foundation of state sovereignty and overshadowing Yemen's right to self-determination.
The Yemen civil war describes the several violations of international legal principles. The Saudi-led coalition has violated the principle of restriction and proportionality through the air raids targeting hospitals and schools and other civilian infrastructures.
The Houthis have breached international humanitarian law by recruiting child soldiers and using strategic tactics. Also, the principle of disclosure, non-intervention, state responsibility, etc. apply in this war. International human rights laws such as UDHR, CRC as well as UN Charter, etc. also apply as laws. International laws and principles contribute to providing justice for harm to civilians, aggravating humanitarian crisis, etc. However, establishing these laws and principles politically in this war remains a challenge.
According to the case of Prosecutor vs. Haratinat, the UN Security Council's involvement reflects the intensity of the conflict, with resolution like 2401 calling for adherence to distinction and proportionality.
The Yemen conflict is classified as a non-international armed conflict governed by international humanitarian law, including Common Article 3 of the 1949 Geneva Conventions and the 1977 Additional Protocol 2. These laws limit harm to civilians and prohibit methods like blockades and indiscriminate attacks. The Saudi-led coalition and Houthis both violate these laws, with the coalition's airstrikes and the Houthis' sieges causing immense civilian suffering. The Arms Trade Treaty of 2013 also prohibits weapon transfer if serious violations of international law are likely, yet this has been ignored. Despite this legal framework, compliance remains absent, leaving international law largely unimplemented.
In 2005, the responsibility to protect principle was endorsed by case of the ongoing conflict in Yemen, humanitarian interventions have been crucial in helping millions affected by violence, economic crisis, and displacement. The UN has been providing vital support to about 20 million people who rely on humanitarian aid. Organizations like the European Civil Protection and Humanitarian Aid Operations, the International Committee of the Red Cross, the International Rescue Committee, IOM, and UNFPA are all actively working to provide food, water, healthcare, and protection. These efforts aim to ease suffering and ensure that Yemenis receive the help they need during this devastating crisis.
The Yemen war fueled devastating war crimes and crimes against humanity driven by international arms supplies.
The Yemen war has been a serious violation of international law, with both the Saudi-led coalition and Houthi rebels responsible for war crimes that have made the humanitarian crisis even worse.
The Saudi Arabia UAE-led coalition supported by US and European arms giants and the Iran-backed Houthi rebels have committed grave violations of international humanitarian law, devastating Yemeni civilians and vital infrastructure despite effort for accountability, including the ICC submission linking deadly airstrikes to European-made weapons. Arms expert decisions persist in violation of the Arms Trade Treaty. Legal challenges in France, Italy, and the UK have not halted sales. Unlike Sweden's accountability in Ukraine, justice for Yemen remains sure. The global community must demand urgent action to address this dire humanitarian crisis and ensure justice for the victims.
Both sides have attacked civilians and civilian buildings, causing many deaths and destruction. The Saudi-led blockade has stopped essential supplies from getting into the country, causing widespread hunger and suffering. Both groups have also used child soldiers and committed acts of torture, arbitrary arrest, and forced disappearances. The International Criminal Court has been called to investigate these crimes, including the role of European arms companies and governments in the conflict. There are calls for an international system to hold those responsible accountable and protect human rights more effectively in the future.
The Yemen civil law highlights the evolving tension between state sovereignty and the protection of human rights as described in the transmission of international law.
The principles of proportionality calls for military action to avoid excessive harm to civilians relative to the anticipated military advantage, which has been a major concern in Yemen, where civilian casualties have been devastating. The principle of distinction requires combatants to differentiate between military targets and civilians, a challenge in urban warfare where non-combatants are often at risk. Additionally, the principle of precaution obliges parties to take all feasible measures to minimize civilian harm, a duty that has been widely debated given the ongoing humanitarian crisis. This principle, integrated to international humanitarian law, must guide any international response to the conflict, reinforcing the international community's responsibility to protect civilians while balancing respect for state sovereignty. The Yemen conflict thus underscores the complexities of applying international legal norms in situations where both human rights violation and state sovereignty are at stake.